everyone, welcome back to my channel. One question I get all of the time is what to do when the wire that fits your body is a different size than the wire that you need for your pattern. In today's video, I'll go over 3 ways that you can alter your pattern for a different sized wire. I'll be showing 3 techniques today. The first 2 techniques are a little bit faster, but not as accurate. They're just something to do if you're looking for a quick fix. The first 2 techniques only really work if you're looking to change wire sizes 1 or 2 sizes. If you have a drastic difference, say something like an omega bust where you're looking to change 3, 4, 5, 6 wire sizes different than what your pattern suggests, then I would skip ahead to technique 3. I've put chapter markers below in the timeline here so you can easily jump around. Let's get started.
So the first way that I'm going to show you how to tackle differences between your wire and your bra cup is a very, very simple method. So this is one that you can do if you've already made your bra and you find that you need a different wire. This is something that I also have done frequently in ready-to-wear bras. I'll buy a ready-to-wear bra and then change out my wires so that I have something that's a little bit more comfortable. Now, the sort of downsides of doing it this way is that it's not going to give you the absolute best fit possible, and it's not great if you're looking at drastic size differences between your wire and what the pattern calls for. So if we boil it down to very basic terms, what we need to make sure is that the distance of our wire, our underwire channeling, is equal to the length of our wire itself. So if I've chosen a larger wire than my pattern calls for, one way that I can make sure that it fits in there is just cutting the wire down. So let's say I've selected a pattern that uses a size 36 wire and I want to put my 40 wire into it. This very easy way you could do that is just trim down the wire. You can trim it down from either the center front side or the underarm side. It doesn't really matter. You can do both or one. So let's say in this scenario, I decided that in order to get the wire to fit in my channeling, I'm going to test it in the bra and see how much of the wire sticks out. In order to get it to fit in my channeling, I need to clip off about 1/2 inch. So I can take something like this, which is just like a tin snip. Do make sure that you have eye protection on if you're doing anything like this, because the metal can go flying. But just, measure down your 1/2 inch or however much you want to cut off. You can snip it off the end of the wire here, and now it should be shorter, and you can tie it in again, make sure that it fits into there. So we need to have some way of finishing off the end here, and my preferred method of finishing off the end is using some shrink wrap tubing. So I've purchased this on Amazon, but it's also available from Home Depot or Lowe's or hardware stops, anywhere like that. And it can come in a variety of widths. I tend to use the smallest width, and that is, let's see, it says it is 3/32 of an inch. So you can just cut off a little bit of that, of your shrink wrap tubing. You can slide it over the end, and then you use your hair dryer or a heat gun or anything like that, and you start heating this up, and it will shrink around the tip of your wire. Once it gets pretty hot and malleable, I like to pinch it down and then fold it over the top so I have a nice clean edge over here. So I would shrink it down, it gets a little tacky, and I pinch it and then fold it, and that covers up the edge of my cut side of my wire, and I can go ahead and use that in my bra. Now, what happens if we have something that is the opposite scenario, where I want to use a wire that is smaller than my pattern? So in that case, you don't need to adjust your wire at all. You can slide your wire into your channeling, get a feel for where it's ending, and then you want to make sure that you leave yourself about 1/4 inch of wire play and just bar tack down here. So there's no hard and fast rule that says you need to have this wire extending all the way into the top of the channel itself. So that's another really easy way. So say you've made a bra that's too big for you or too big for your wire, you just put in your smaller wire and tack it down a little bit lower down. So in terms of pros and cons of this like cheating method, A, you can do it to a bra that you've already made and help fix it or help it fit just a little bit better. And it's really, really fast solution. So it doesn't require a lot of pattern tweaking or anything like that. But some cons to using this sort of method, let's say you're cutting down your wire shorter, you may have decided that this wire already fits you really great and you like the height of it. And so if you have to cut it down shorter to fit it into your pattern, it might not fit you as well. You also might have some issues with your cradle not lying as flat as one that is perfectly fit to the wire that you're using. So you might not get perfect tacking against your body of the cradle and the bridge and up around here if you're changing that sort of like wire length without really touching any of the shape. And it's also, as I said, not great if you're looking at making drastic differences. So this is something I would stick to if you're only looking to slide down and up between 1 and 2 wire sizes. So say something like a 36 to a 40. I wouldn't necessarily do this if you want to make more than 2 wire size changes, if that makes sense. So the next method I'm going to show you is a little bit more involved and requires you to sort of alter your pattern before you sew up the bra. So this is good if you only have one size of the pattern. That is, you don't have a multi-size pattern that you can sort of like grade between different sizes, or maybe you happen to be at the very upper limit of that pattern or the lower limit of that pattern in terms of sizing. So this is the next method that you can sort of work with. First, I'm going to show you what to do if you're trying to make your wires smaller, and then I'm going to reset and then show you what to do if you want to make the wire larger for your pattern. And in this method, we're really only going to be looking at the bridge side and the underarm side. We're not really looking at anything down here. So that's why it's a little bit harder to do, but it's not the most accurate and most complex method. So the first thing I want to do is figure out how much shorter I need to make my bridge and underarm side to fit my smaller wire. So what I like to do is hold my wire in here, and I'm going to just drop it down right into the very center of my bowl. Then I'm going to walk it around on this wire seam side until I figure out where the end of my wire hits, and I'm going to mark that into place. So that's the very tippy end of my wire there. I need to account for wire play, so I'm going to add 1/4 inch on top of that for wire play. And then I'm going to add 1/4 inch on top of that for my seam allowance. So that's going to be the new top of my bridge piece, and I can go ahead and cut off the excess material up there. Now I can go ahead and walk around to the other side as well. So I'm going to line up the edge of my wire here with where I said the edge of my wire was before, giving myself wire play. And again, just walking it along the curve and figuring out where it is the end of the wire is going to be over here. So just like I did before, I'm going to mark the end of the wire. I'm going to give myself 1/4 inch for wire play. And then on this side, it looks like we have 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I need to make sure to allow myself 3/8 inch seam allowance on the top here. So that's where my new edge of my underarm side is going to be. Most often you will have a 3/8 inch or larger seam allowance on the underarm side just because we're accounting for elastic in this, whereas this one is a fabric to fabric connection. So once you figure out where you want the edge of your underarm section to be, I just like to use a curved ruler, and I can sort of blend this back into my original side seam. So I know that I want it to end here, and then I'm going to blend it back in to my original point up here. And once we've determined that, we can go ahead and cut it off. Now, in this case, you may need to compare this with your backband piece, and you might cut this down at a little more of an angle. It's really stylistically up to you, but you do kind of want a smooth transition from your cradle into your backband. So it's something that you're going to have to play by ear. So now we've shortened that wire line distance by this much in the bridge and this much on the underarm side. So it should go ahead and work perfectly with our smaller wire now, even though this cradle was for a much larger wire. Now that we've made those changes to the cradle, we're also going to want to transfer those over to our cups as well. So in this case, we're only taking distance from the very top of the bridge and the very top of the frame itself. So the only piece that I'm going to need to change is, of course, this upper cup piece where it interacts with those two sections. So the easiest thing I think to do is just to measure those two pieces that we cut off and adjust it over here. So in this case, if I measure the height of the bridge that I cut off, what I get is 5/16. So I'm going to transfer that over to my upper cut piece here, and I'm going to measure down 5/16. And draw myself a little line there. Then I'm going to go over to this piece as well and measure that one. So in this particular piece, I've got, let's see, 9/16 that I'm taking off. So again, find where that corresponds to this cut piece here, and we want to make sure that we take off 9/16 on this side. Now we can use sort of our curved ruler to redraw in the upper edge of our cut piece with those new anticipated ending points. So I can see that the original upper cut piece here is a slight curve, so I want to sort of maintain that slight curve and just drop it down lower, making sure I'm connecting with that point so that the wire line of my pattern itself is getting smaller. So I'm going to draw that line in there. And again, here on the underarm side, I kind of want to maintain that same sort of arc or same sort of curve as was the original, but just dropping it down to where my new notch marks are. And once I have that drawn into place, I can cut off the excess. So now I've adapted my pattern to use a smaller wire than it was originally drafted for, just by taking length off of my bridge and underarm side and also removing equal length from the top of my cup piece here. So now let's go ahead and do that same sort of technique, but looking at increasing my wire. So let's say in this scenario, it's calling for a 36 wire and I want to put a 40 in. So it's sort of that opposite effect. And it's going to go much the same way that we did to make the wire smaller. Again, I'm going to sort of find the bottom of my wire and align that with the bottom of my cut piece. Then I'm going to trace it around and figure out where that wire ends and mark it into place. Once we figure out where the wire ends, I'm going to add my wire play. So in my case, I'm going to add a 1/4 inch of wire play, and I'm going to add a 1/4 inch for seam allowance. Basically, I want to stick with the same seam allowance I had prior to making these adjustments. So you can see in this scenario, we've now lengthened the bridge sort of considerably to accommodate that taller or larger wire. So just like we did in the other way, we're going to align the edge of our wire up with the edge where we said it was before, and then walk it around the other direction to figure out where it's going to land on the underarm side, and mark it into place. Give yourself some wire play, and then lastly add on your seam allowance. Because this is the underarm side, I know I need 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, so that's what I'm giving myself. I've just taking a new line, blending my tick marks down to the original. And now I've added length on both the underarm and bridge size of my pattern. So if I go ahead and double check and walk this length, we should have enough room now in our underwire channeling that we can accommodate the larger wire, and we have our 1/2 inch of wire play, 1/4 inch on either side, as well as our seam allowances. So just like we did in making the wire smaller, we're going to need to go ahead and make those adjustments to our upper pattern piece as well, our upper cut piece. And you want to make the adjustments on the same place in the cups as where you've made the changes in your frame. So in this case, I've made changes to my frame right there and right there. So that's where I'm going to need to add my distances. So I'm just going to go ahead and tape my upper cut piece onto some extra paper so that I have room to work with. So now I need to measure how much I've added. So in this case, I've added 10/16 on the bridge. So I want to measure up 10/16. So 4, 8, 9, 10. That's how much I need to add on my upper cup and the center front. And then if I measure how much I've added on this side, I have 4, 5, 6/16. So same deal, want to go over to here and add 6/16. Now that I know where my 2 new targets are, I can go ahead and sketch in my new upper cup lines. Now on this, so you can choose to just increase the height of your upper cup if you want. If you kind of like a lower sitting cup, you can also just connect your tick mark here to like maybe the existing underarm edge of the tick mark. That's also entirely acceptable. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for this version just to show you what that would look like. So there's my new upper cup edge, and on my underarm as well. Like once you have your cardinal points where you know you need to hit, you can sort of just play around with there. So I'm going to cut out my new upper cut piece. So now I have my upper cut piece adjusted, and everything should still fit in exactly as it did before. Because I've added the space to the upper cut piece, it was the same area where we added space to our frame. Like I said, this technique is a little bit harder because it does require you to do some pattern drafting. And of course, there are some pros and cons. The pros being that obviously this is a simple modification. It doesn't require having too much experience, literally just measuring the length of your wire and adjusting accordingly. And the benefit of this over the last method I showed you is, of course, you can keep the length of the wire that you like. So if you liked how this wire fit you, you don't have to like cut it down, or you won't have any excess material sort of like flopping over the side of the bra. Now, some disadvantages of this technique is you still might get some puckering around this cradle section here because the cradle is not designed for this shape of wire. So the shape of the different sized wire is going to cause you have your cradle sort of like puckering and moving around like that. So aesthetically, it's not the best. And then again, if you're looking to make changes that are multiple sizes different, so more than like 1 or 2 wire sizes different, this is not the best method. So the third option that I'm going to show you today is the best in my opinion. I think it gives you the best fit and shape of the bra, but it does take a little bit more time and it requires you to have a little bit more patience in terms of drafting and changing up your pattern. So in scenario 3, again, I'm going to show you moving to a larger wire and a smaller wire. I'm going to start out by showing a smaller wire. So let's say that you have measured against your body, you've done your root trace and all this stuff, and you found out that the wire that you think fits you the best is going to be a 36 wire. And so you're going to go ahead and print out the cradle that corresponds to your ideal wire size. And you want to make sure that you're sticking with the same band length. So if you've decided that you needed a 38 band in this pattern, you want to go ahead and print out the cradle that has a 38 band and corresponds to the wire that fits you. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and set this aside. You don't need to make any alterations to it at all because it already fits the wire that you're going to use. Now, the next thing you're going to do is print out two cup patterns. You're going to print out the cup that fits your volume, and you're going to print out the cup that fits your wire. And what we're going to do, I like to think of this as like Mr. Potato Head. So we're going to take the attributes from this pattern that we like, and we're going to apply them to the attributes of this pattern that we like. Which I mean is like we're going to take off the nose, we're going to switch around the eyes, we're going to make sure that we configure our Mr. Potato Head exactly the way that we like it. So that's why I'm printing off the cups that fit my volume and the cups that fit my wire. And what I'm going to do is overlay these two on top of each other and grade between them. So I'm going to select first my inside lower cup over here, and I'm going to select my inside lower cup from over here. So you need to think a little bit about where the wire line of your bra is. So in this particular pattern, the wire line is down here. It's going to be up here. It's going to be down here, right? And then it's going to connect up, hit over there. So sometimes it does make it a little bit easier for me if I go ahead and mark in exactly where my wire will be touching in my pattern. Okay, so I'm going to overlay my two cut pieces and then grade between them. So I have my two cut pieces here, and I'm going to set them on top of each other. So in this particular pattern here, when I set them on top of each other, where they look like they fit up the best is if I'm meeting at this point here, but you just kind of need to rotate it around and see where you can get the curve of one pattern piece to match up with the curve of the second pattern piece. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm keeping the volume from the larger cup up here, but I want to keep the wire line of the smaller cut piece, which is on top. So I know that I need my wire line to end right here. Then it's just a question of grading between where I want my wire line to end, but make sure I'm maintaining all of the volume in the center of the cup. So I just take a curved ruler and I'm going to blend in like that. And I can just trim off my excess. So now I have this cut piece altered so that it has the wire line of the small cut piece. You can see that the distance from here to here matches the distance from here to here, but that I haven't altered at all any of that volume that's in the center of my cup. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for all of my cut pieces. So this one I can set aside. Now I'm going to look at my outside lower cut piece again, overlay them on top of each other, trying to find out where I get a wire line curve that looks the most synergetic, and marking in the small section there. I'm going to take my curved ruler and that looks pretty good. So I'm just trying to get a smooth line that goes from my original cut piece down to that reduced wire line below. Again, I can just cut off the excess. And now I have my adjusted pattern piece. So I've got the volume of the full cup, but the wire line of the smaller cup. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and look at the upper cup and make that alteration as well. So just like before, we're gonna take the one that fits our wire and overlay it on top. I'm gonna push it all the way over to the side on one side and mark in where it is on the wire line I need this to end. So I've done that over there. And then I can sort of slide this over to the other side and mark in where it needs to end over there. I think the obvious thing to do here would be to connect this point with this point. However, we don't want to change any of the volume in the center cup. What we're really wanting to do is grade between those two. So I'm going to still use my curved ruler and again, go from that notch mark and grade out to the original edge, sort of meeting there at that apex point or where that notch is. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Go from where I know I need to shorten my wire and take a little triangle piece out on there. So if I cut away my excess, what I'm going to end up getting is something that has a more dramatic curve than was originally on the pattern piece. And that is what I would expect to see with something like this. So if you want to double check it, you can just make sure that your wire line is the same on this side and the length of your wire line is the same on this side. But of course you have all of this extra volume here down below from your larger cut piece. So in this example here, I've just switched, I've reduced my wire line by 2 sizes, but this technique will work no matter how large or small you need to make your wire. So this is the ideal technique if you're looking to do multiple wire size change difference. The other thing to keep in mind is that the more seams that you have crossing your wire line, the easier this gets. So in this particular example here, you can see that I have 3 seams that cross my wire line. I have a seam here, I have a seam here, and a seam here. So if you have a pattern that has even more pattern pieces, that gives you increased flexibility because you can spread those changes over multiple seams. So if I had to take all of that distance out from just a single seam, it makes the cup fit a lot differently than if I was able to take it out a little bit from lots of different spaces around the cup. Now, if you're looking at a dramatically different wire to cup size, so let's say you're really omega shaped and you really need to trim down your wire line, you might need to add in some additional things like darts into your cup. So let's say you've done this as much as you can do. You might want to add in some additional darts. You've decided that you need to decrease your wire line by another 1/4 inch. Okay, so you can add in a dart right here, this as well. So you can take as many little mini darts along the bottom of the cup that you need to. And in this scenario, when you would sew it up, you would sew up that dart and you can see how that is already giving you a shorter wire line without changing the volume at all. So if you have a huge drastic amount of change, I would say split it up between all of your seams that you can, and then start taking little mini darts along the wire line so you can get an even more dramatic size reduction of your wire. If you don't like doing darts, you can go ahead and put a gathering stitch along the bottom of the cup. That's another great way to sort of like reduce the wire line of your cup piece and still give you a lot of projected volume. And just like before, now that I've shown you how to make your wire line smaller, let's take a look at making your wire line larger. Basically, we want to go ahead and do the opposite of what we've done before. So I've measured my body, I've decided that I need a size 40 wire, and that I need the band of my bra to be a 38. So I'm going to go ahead and print out the cradle that corresponds to my band size and my wire size. So in this case, I've printed out a 38C. And I don't need to make any adjustments to this cradle because it's already made to fit the wire that I'm going to use. I'm going to need to make all of my adjustments to the cut pieces themselves. So just like we graded in between 2 sizes to get our smaller wire, we're going to grade between 2 sizes to get our larger wire. So the first thing I want to do is, just like I did with the other pattern piece, I want to identify where's my wire line on these pattern pieces? My wire line is going to be here and there and there and there. So I want to make sure that all of my changes are working to increase this distance without changing anything in the middle. My wire line is there, 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 and there. So I've printed out two patterns. I printed out the pattern that fits my cup volume, and I printed out the pattern that fits my chosen wire. So I'm going to start with my lower cup pieces first. I'm looking at my inside lower cup piece here, and I'm going to align it with my inside lower cup piece over here. And in this section, we're kind of going to do the opposite. So I'm going to overlay the smaller piece still on top of the larger piece. And what I want to do, so when we were trying to make our wire line smaller, we went to the smaller wire line. On this one, we want to do the opposite. We're going to go from the larger wire line, but then grade into our smaller cut piece. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to figure out how can I get from the larger wire line to my smaller cut piece and draw that into place. And then continue around your smaller cut piece here. Then I can cut off my excess. So what I should have is a cut piece that maintains that wire line edge of the larger piece, but it now has the same volume as the smaller piece. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of my pattern. So I've selected the one that fits my wire and the one that fits my cup. I want to overlay the two wire lines on top of each other, like that. And I want to grade from the larger wire line to the smaller cut piece. So I've done that on this side, grading out to the larger wire line. On this side, it sort of already meets that wire line, but I need to mark in where it sort of deviates. Okay. And now I can trim away all of that extra. We can double check it again just to make sure, overlaying our wire lines, and we can see that yes, we've now got the wire line from the original large cut piece, but we've trimmed away all of that excess volume in the middle of the cup, so it should fit our projection. And we're going to repeat that again on the upper cut piece here. My upper cut piece is going to be a little bit different than the opposite direction. What I want to do is sort of make sure that I have the apexes sitting in sort of the same spot. I'm going to keep my neckline edge lined up, and I can see that I want my apex to eventually end right up here. So I want my apex to eventually end right up there. That's my target. So I want to go from the original wire line on this piece, making sure I'm crossing through that apex point up there. So in this, we're actually going to end up going pretty flat, I want to say. So I'm just going to draw a line meeting my original wire line. I want to hit that apex and then back to the original wire line over here. And I can go ahead and cut off that excess as well. Now, we may need to double check to make sure that our seam lengths are the same. I have a suspicion that my upper cut piece will not be the same. So we need to make sure that when we're sewing it up that the distance from there to there is equal to the distance from here to here. And it's very likely going to not work. But the best way I like to do it is, again, marking in sort of that apex point, that halfway point. Now I know that that should line up with this. And coming down, and we can see that we need to make it a little bit shorter on that side. Again, matching up our seam line with that apex point over here, walking it down. And we can see that we need to make it a little bit shorter over here. If I overlay the volume cup piece on here, you can see that it's a little bit different than the volume cup piece. So that's why you can't like do a straight grade between the two. But once I have those two end marks located, I can just go ahead and trim that little bit off of both sides. So now I should have a cut piece that works with that seam line length. And I know that my arc here matches my distance here. As I had mentioned earlier, this technique is probably the best way to go about altering for a different size wire. It's going to give you a pattern that fits the best, and because you're spreading that change over multiple seams across the bra, you'll get a much more seamless fit, and it's going to fit your wire perfectly instead of having little tucks or pleats or things like this. If you're changing between a large amount of wire sizes, again, go with this method 3 because it's going to get you the most accurate fit. The only sort of downside of method 3 is, of course, that it is more complicated. You're having multiple touch points on the bra, so if you ever have to recreate it, you are going to have to redo all of these different little modifications before you even start looking at the fit of, you know, the neckline or the underarm edge or anything like that.
I hope you found this information useful as you learn to fit your bra pattern to yourself. I'll see everyone next time. Take care.